Hello, I'm your host, Giselle Gamby, and this is the Intuitive Pool Podcast, where together we'll embrace the plans we did not make yet, unfold businesses and lives that are so much greater in wealth in all ways than any business or life plan could ever achieve. My wish is that you make intuition your most trusted advisor. So buckle up, get present, and let's go. Hello, and welcome to another episode. It's the 8th of February that I'm recording this episode, and I'm super delighted that we hit 1,000 downloads on the weekend, 2 months after I started this podcast. So I want to thank you so much for being with me and also for the amazing feedback that I've had. And it has really encouraged me. You know, when people say to me, "How are you?" I say, I feel really alive, really, really alive. This podcast is creating so much energy, and it's almost like as if I'm addicted, but in all the right ways. There's such an overflow of inspiration and an overflow of impact that it's having, that it's just, I'm in so much appreciation. So that's where I wanted to start this episode, in my appreciation of having followed the intuitive pool to create this, and also my appreciation for you and for the beautiful feedback that you've given me along the way. So this episode birthed really last Thursday when I was on my mastermind call with my coach, and I was talking about the joy that I'm having with this podcast. And as I was sharing, I thought, I'd really love to go to a place of deeper appreciation and to pull out the components that I can observe now of the journey to following the intuitive pool to actually create this podcast. And so I did that this morning, and was a little emotional at some times, because I came to realize something that I had not seen until I started to, pull it apart. And I realized this, what I can now see is that the intuitive pool pulls you into a remembering of where you didn't believe you belonged, but always did in truth. So the intuitive pool pulls you into a remembering of where you didn't believe you belonged, but always did in truth. So the way I'm going to play this episode out is I'm going to share different moments that I had last year in 2021. And I'm going to ask you a question for you to be with that will have you that will have you contemplate that moment that was key to the journey of me even knowing what I was intuitively pulled to do. And I'm excited about sharing this episode because I'm recording it for a couple of reasons. One of them is that I'm having a group call with my clients on Thursday, and I'm wanting them to go through these questions. And I thought, wow, how cool is that I get to share that with the wider community so that you can do that with yourself. So the first part of the journey started with a directive that I received. And the directive, or the invitation into the directive, arrived a few years ago on retreat with my coach in New Zealand. And I think it happened 3 or 4 years ago. And it was a statement that Daniel Batten said to me. And he said, "You can't breadth your way into depth, but you can depth your way into breadth." So specifically, an example that I can give you is when we have a new coach who doesn't really have the life experience, who then wants to impact on a broader level, right? Volume, who wants to work with volumes of people, but they don't have the depth yet. And there's something that's out of integrity there. And so, and we see a lot of that, right? We see a lot of that, especially on Facebook and social media. So you can't breadth your way into depth, right? By going to a volume model, you as a coach will not experience the depth that's actually required within you to truly be of service to someone. However, you can depth your way into breadth. So the deeper you go, the more people you can serve. And so that was proposed to me, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And then last year, the directive arrived. It was, okay, it's time now. It's time to extend myself, to extend how internally free I am to literally share my voice. Not that I thought I was actually going to literally share my verbal voice, but to share my leadership with more people. And why? Because absolutely, having been on this awakening journey since 1999, there's depth there, and it's something that I've absolutely committed to. My top value in life is to know who I really am and to be of service from that place. And so the directive was to depth my way into breadth. So I'm going to ask you now, what directives have you been receiving? Maybe you can observe moments in your life where, even if it happened like it did for me 3 or 4 years ago, but I wasn't ready then until last year, maybe there's been moments where directive has shown itself and perhaps now you're ready to hear it. Or perhaps now you're ready not only to hear it, but to commit to it. So again, like always with these episodes, you might wish to press pause if you want to be with that a little longer. Let me speak to another directive that arrived in March last year. Again, it was on a retreat with my coach and the mastermind group. And before the retreat occurred, I kept on having this visual in my mind's eye. And it was the visual of, just imagine a circular waterfall if you can, not just a waterfall that's kind of like a linear, like straight lined waterfall. It was almost like a volcano, that shape. And it just overflowed with like water gushing out of everywhere. And this image wouldn't leave me alone. And then when I went to retreat, the image came back to me. And the words that I put to that image, that it was an intuitive signal, right? It was an intuitive signal. The words that I put to that were voluminous generosity, like a voluminous generosity of service, a voluminous generosity of love, a voluminous generosity of joy, a voluminous generosity of impact, and so on and so on. And so those words and that symbol gave me a directive that was completely in alignment with the first directive of being even more free to share my love more widely with the community. That symbol of the circular, extremely overflowing waterfall also created or informed the theme of 2022. So the theme of 2022 actually arrived in March 2021. And that was the theme of overflow. So again, I'm going to ask you, what directives have you been given that have a part to play in where you are being intuitively pulled? What directives have you been given? So another part to the journey to being pulled intuitively into this podcast is one of the episode themes, and that is that I entered the cave I had feared with men, with really powerful men. And This had happened last year and the year before, began really 2020. The beautiful thing that arrived when I reconciled this fear. So as I entered the cave I feared with really, really powerful men and reconciled where I thought I had zero value and where I would never be met, was that I realized through the experience of actually facing into that cave, I realized that I was actually perfectly placed here because, as I've shared in previous episodes, what these really, really powerful men who were in their egoic masculine of power and control had not given themselves permission to be who I am naturally. And so aren't we a perfect match? So there's just this really beautiful theme here that I had not realized until I started to pull the journey apart this morning. This really beautiful theme of belonging to a place that we thought we had no position in, that we thought we had no sense of value, that we thought would be the last place that we belong to. There's such a sense of belonging that arrives when we enter the cave that we have feared. And so I'm going to ask you, what is the cave that you have feared to enter? What have you resisted? What stories have you told yourself that is just not for you? What have you pushed away? What have you closed the door on? What have you not owned up to it simply being fear and a story that you've told yourself? And what has been the consequence of that? The consequence of resistance, of agreeing with that story. And should you enter the cave just now in your mind's eye, you may find some irony in that cave. You may realize that what you had pushed away because you believed that you had no value here or had no contribution to make or had no place of being here, you might actually find that you always, in truth, belonged here for the contribution you can make by being who you are in your natural, innate, authentic expression of who you really are, that has always been with you, that you could not be anything but. So perhaps you, in truth, perfectly belong in the cave you feared to enter. So the third piece to pulling this journey to following the intuitive pull apart was about following the breadcrumbs. And there were several breadcrumbs that had presented themselves throughout the year. It started again on that retreat in March 2021, where having entered the cave, I'd feared, and having realized that I absolutely belonged there, I wrote a piece of writing that I thought I would put on my website about the wholehearted man. And I shared it on the group call. We were on Zoom because we were retreating COVID style across the world. As I read the piece and I completed it, the feedback that I got was, there's something about hearing your voice speak that out. And then that got reaffirmed by other people who had heard me read that piece of writing. And I thought, okay, all right, I will turn this into a piece of recorded material and I will outsource the production of that. right? I'll find people, I'll just record it, and then I'll find people that can produce it into something that can then go on my website. But I didn't follow through. And the fourth piece to the unfolding of the intuitive pull is that the idea wasn't ready to hatch. You may have read that post that I put up on Saturday. It was acute intuition Saturday morning. I had no intention of writing anything on Saturday morning, and I had this acute intuition with the words. They just arrived actually whilst I was in the shower. It isn't ready to hatch, or it wasn't ready to hatch, and it wasn't ready to hatch. More needed to unfold. So again, months later, in 2021, I was on a group call with my mastermind group, again with my coach, and I read another piece of writing to the group. And guess what they said? I think you can imagine. There's something about hearing your voice speak that out. I was like, okay, all right, I'm hearing this now. I'm hearing this. And I thought, okay, I'll do the same thing. I now actually have someone that I can reach out to, and I did. And I said, I will start to create a podcast. So now this piece of recording had now turned into the idea of expressing myself in another form, because I'd always expressed myself through writing. I'll express myself through voice, because this is the feedback that I've had twice, and it was resonating. But I'm not a technical person, is what I told myself. So I will outsource that to Jude Ella. For those of you who know Jude, incredible cinematographer, and he can put that together. And I messaged, and we agreed that we'd do that. But guess what? He wasn't ready to hatch. We go back to that. Because synchronicity had to arrive. The next piece of the unfolding. Synchronicity had to arrive. So serendipity has that I'm on Facebook, and all of a sudden I get this advertisement. It's your turn to podcast. Free 5-day boot camp. And I think, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, but I'm not really that committed, I say. I'll dip my toe in. It's free. It's 5 days. Oh gosh, I don't know if I'll do 5 days. I don't know if I'll commit to that, I said to myself. But I'll dip my toe in, and I'll tell a few people. And so I told Alana, if you're listening, and I told Shari, and I told Lizzie. And I listened to the first recording, because Kathy Heller, the mentor, is in the States. And as I was listening to the first recording, I loved it. I loved what I was hearing. And so I devoured it, and I did the second day, and I devoured that, and I did the third day, and I devoured that. And I knew that I would be committing to her paid program. Obviously she was speaking about that through the free 5 days. And, I think probably by day 2 or by day 3, I was committed. And so I committed to learning the production side of podcasting. And ironically, I found out that I belonged here as well. So here we have this theme of belonging again. And I let go of an identity that I had, a story about who I thought I was. And that is that I thought I was not a technical person. And so therefore the production side was not my thing. So that's why I went and twice, as you can hear in my story, tried to outsource it to someone who was. And yet, through the production side of podcasting, not only just through the recording, and yes, I remembered also that I belonged in the recording section of podcasting, because I embraced or even more freedom to express myself more fully, and the joy of expressing myself more fully. And I put to bed a story that I had, that I'm not very good at verbal communication, right? I had this story. I can write. Yeah, I'm a writer. Yep, can do that. But I had this story that I'm not a very good verbal communicator. I put that down, and I realized, oh my God, I so love expressing myself verbally. And I'm really enjoying the freedom that I have in the different expressions of this podcast. Sometimes they're serious, sometimes they're somber, sometimes they're super excited. I feel like the couple of last times, the one that talks about living life in the overflow, I felt like I was on speed. So many different expressions. And so not only did I belong in the recording and in the creation of the conversation, but I also belonged in the production side of things because I remembered that I love being creative. And I remembered that I love creating emotional sensory experiences. When I was training manager back in my old hotel days, this is what I would do. The training would not just be a one-way educational experience. It would be as full-on sensory with music and oils and different lighting. And I love that sensory experience. And so I have a couple of questions here. I'm going to go backwards. What have been the breadcrumbs that have been showing themselves? Perhaps they showed themselves over the years. Perhaps they showed themselves at different points last year. Perhaps they showed themselves at different points this year, even listening to the podcast. What have been the breadcrumbs? What hasn't been ready to hatch, right? So you've taken some action, you've been inspired, you've taken some action based on these breadcrumbs, and yet that inspiration or that idea hasn't been realized because it wasn't ready to hatch. So note, what wasn't ready to hatch, or what isn't ready to hatch, even possibly? What wasn't ready to hatch? And what isn't ready to hatch? And then let's look at synchronicities. Have there been synchronicities that have been arriving? Have you had those serendipitous moments that was never the plan that you made? Can you start appreciating that? And if not, if those serendipitous moments have not arrived yet, hold space for them. Hold space for them, because sometimes those things aren't ready to hatch because these serendipitous experiences need to arrive. And I'm not talking about being powerless and waiting and putting the power outside of you, not at all. I'm talking about absolutely being present. Absolutely being committed to that directive. If we go back to the beginning of today's conversation, absolutely being committed to that directive. Absolutely being committed to entering the cave you feared. Absolutely following the breadcrumbs. And also noticing that when things aren't ready to hatch, perhaps there are other things that need to fall into place. Perhaps there's a bigger picture unfolding, yeah? That's out of your control, yet is in total service to you and in total service to that initial directive or directives. So allow space for those synchronicities, let go of control, right? Fall into faith around those directives and allow those synchronicities to arrive. And if they are arriving or have arrived, take note. The next piece of the unfolding that I pulled apart this morning is around allowing what doesn't 100% resonate to fall away in order to remember what your genius zone is and to be there in that genius zone 100%. So allowing what doesn't 100% resonate to fall away in order to remember what your genius zone is and to be there 100%. So when I realized that I'm going to create a podcast, I'm going to do the recordings, I'm going to produce them, because those serendipitous moments happen, and I found myself on that program and the free program, and then I knew that I was going to commit to the paid program within 2 or 3 days of that. I decided to call the podcast Overflow. That was the original name of the podcast, because that was in line with the voluminous generosity of the symbol that I saw at the beginning of March last year, and right, and it was in alignment with the directive to really broaden how far my leadership goes, right? Overflow. And so I had an artist create a beautiful piece of art, which is the podcast cover by Alex Saba, Susie de Jong's daughter. Incredible. She'd already created it, actually. I had it standing on my wall or sitting on my wall because I'd bought that piece of art a few years ago. And then when I was looking for a piece of art, I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, it's staring at me in the face. And so I asked Alex if she could create, the Overflow podcast with Giselle Gamby. And she did that. And then I made the rookie error. And the rookie error was that I hadn't checked if that name Overflow had been taken. And guess what? It had. And I was in so much disappointment. And I went into panic. And I let myself feel those feelings. And then I owned up to the fact that, you know what? The name Overflow had not ever really resonated 100% with me. It had always felt a little off, just a little off. And so when I admitted that to myself, I then allowed space for the name that would arrive that would be totally on point. And then the name, the intuitive pool, arrived. And it's only this morning that I realized that name, the intuitive pool, was so on point because that's where my genius zone is. So of course it's called the intuitive pool. And thanks to this process, pulling it apart, I've remembered that, this is where my genius zone is, or one of the places where my genius zone is. So the unfolding journey to following the intuitive pool and to knowing what that intuitive pool is to allow what doesn't 100% resonate to fall away in order to remember what your genius zone is and to allow yourself to be there 100%. So what is your genius zone? What are you being pulled into? What genius zone are you being pulled into? What genius zone are you being asked to remember and appreciate even more deeply that, hey, this is like your area of mastery, right? It's allowing space to remember and to appreciate and to be 100% in your genius zone, in your mastery. And then the other piece to pulling apart the journey to following the intuitive pool to create this podcast called The Intuitive Pool was that I received, allowed myself to receive, I should say, the most perfect support, right? The most perfect. I could not have done this if I did not have the support that I did. And I just got off the phone with some really dear friends who found that perfect support themselves with some challenges that they're having with their daughter. And they were talking about they could have gone down that route and they went down this route, and it would have been a completely different outcome had they gone down the other route that didn't 100% resonate, nor did it actually fall into place. So allowing yourself to receive the most perfect supports. I've been on this mastermind with Daniel Batten for 4 years now. This is my 4th year. And then, as I said, serendipity had it that I would meet a lady called Kathy Heller on Facebook, who has a podcast called The Kathy Heller Show and is an incredible mentor. And her program was just perfect for me. And the technical side of things, learning that and the way that it was taught was perfect for me. So allow yourself to give yourself the perfect support, receive the most perfect support. And then finally, this one kind of got me a little teary when I pulled it apart, was that I realized that it's okay to be powerful in areas that I didn't believe my power belonged. I realized that it's okay to be powerful in areas that I didn't believe my power belonged, such as how much my voice is heard, how much my voice is received, and how much my messaging is valuable to others. So, do you allow yourself or make it okay to be powerful in areas that you didn't believe your power belonged? Do you make it okay to be powerful in areas that you didn't believe your power belonged? And here we have this theme of belonging again. Did I ever know that this is what I would be speaking about today? Never. I never realized that the intuitive pull pulls you into a remembering of where you didn't believe you belonged, but always did in truth. Enjoy the process of inquiry, and I really hope that this episode will activate even more clarity around where you're at, around what you're being pulled towards, around the cave that you feared, around reconciling that and realizing that you've always belonged there, that you're perfectly placed in with the people and the environments that you thought you would never be met. And I also hope really to almost fast forward this realization or this remembrance that it's okay to be powerful in the areas that you didn't believe your power belonged. Enjoy the clarity, enjoy the unfolding. Let me know what happens. Thank you so much for listening. I trust that you were intuitively pulled. If you like this episode, please follow this podcast and share the love with your family, friends, and colleagues. Let them know that I'm here. And if you'd like to have more communication with me, join the Intuitive Pull Facebook group, where you'll find details in the show notes, and you can let me know about what pulls you've been receiving by listening to these episodes. Until next time, so much love.